Cool. Okay, so I'm talking to Claire today. Claire, how are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. So we're going to be talking about emotional resilience, and you're going to tell us a little bit about that. And so I genuinely don't really know much about it. So can you sort of explain as basically as you can so I can understand what emotional resilience is?
So I think that our ability as individuals to deal with difficult moments in our lives. Sorry, the cat's coming in. To deal with difficult moments in our lives. I mean, personally, I've found that my resilience has got better with age, and I think that my ability to cope with stressful things when I was younger was appalling.
Right.
You know, I would overreact about things, I would panic, I would compound problems that were happening with my reaction. So I'd actually make a smaller situation much, much worse. And, you know, I had come from a background where there was a lot of sort of drama all the time. And so I wasn't helped with family members that were particularly calm or would sit and talk things through. You know, all of them would, you know, jump into a storm in a teacup. So, you know, I think it took me a long, long time to actually, you know, to sit back in a stressful situation and quietly think, what's the easiest way to get through this? And I think that's what emotional resilience.
Or do you think it's experience? Because you said it's become better with age, but do you think it's the more you go through, the more you learn how to deal with things?
Yes, I do. I think, how can I put it? I know a lot of people that had very difficult childhoods. And now, I mean, I'm 46 now. And, you know, a lot of those people that sort of had very dramatic first 20 years of their lives and fell apart and went crazy and did wild things and reacted badly are now the people that are quite stoic and thoughtful about things. I know a lot of people in my life that lived quite quiet lives and, you know, had reasonably calm existences, who I used to envy very much. And now they're having things happen to them, like, for instance, losing parents or having marital breakdowns. And they're falling apart in a way that, because they've never really had to deal with hardships in their lives until now, they're experiencing the first hardships of their lives now. Whereas I think people that experienced hardships in their lives as a young person have hopefully figured out how they can overcome difficult moments of life. But I think, you know, a lot of people that have constant problems with alcohol or drugs or behavioral problems, a lot of those are stemming from things that happened at, you know, former times in their lives that they haven't faced and untangled and managed to disseminate, and, you know, or are still using drugs and drink as a way to mask and hide from the issues that they've never quite come to terms with.
Okay, so do you think that if there is something that's happened in your life, that there has to be an element of understanding around that? Like, 10 years of absolute madness, drug addiction, and until somebody sat me down and spelled it out to me and explained my behaviors to me, which I didn't see, and why I behave this way, and how to use that behavior in a positive way, or even just how to understand that when that behavior creeps in, this is what it looks or feels like. It really helped me change the way that I react in situations.
Absolutely.
You think that has to happen?
I think when you are emotionally broken or substance abusing, I think that and for me, I was in complete denial. People wouldn't, you know, I was doing such self-destructive things. I was just tearing myself apart, both emotionally and physically from not looking after myself very well at all. I mean, I was completely underweight. I wasn't eating or sleeping properly, abusing drugs and drink all the time. I got banned from driving twice, you know, so having to go to court and stuff like that. I mean, you know, just, you know, and letting people take advantage of me, you know, having run-ins with the police because of the people I was hanging around with. And, you know, I had people in my life that tried to warn me, and for years I would just say, no, it's fine, it's nothing, you know, that's fine, it's, you know, and minimizing it and not looking, you know, the problems, you know, that were happening as my own doing for a start, because I blamed everything on the things that had happened in my youth. So it was like, I was so badly treated in my childhood that I can just do whatever I want now, you know, and using that as an excuse, instead of taking personal responsibility every day for what was happening. And then when things went wrong for me, I would just say, well, it's so unfair, I was so hard done to, and now, you know, nobody's here to help me anymore. And that's sort of like self-wallowing in your own self-pity, even though I was the creator of the ever-decreasing circles that was dragging me further and further into a pit of sort of, you know, real disappointing sort of events. And I was 30, really. I was 32, really, when I finally did something that woke me up. And now I can sit here and look back on my youth and see how I denied what I was doing was damaging me.
You mentioned earlier you let people take advantage of you. So if there's people that are maybe in those situations now, if you was in denial then, what sort of things were they doing to take advantage of you?
So, I mean, you know, I had people that used to come and live in my house. You know, I am more than happy for people, you know, friends of mine to come and live in my house and make food for them and share what I have with other people. That is not a problem to me at all. But there comes a tipping point where that person's benefiting from your own generosity a bit more than you're benefiting from their, you know, friendship and company. And that, I mean, that's the minimal end of the scale, all the way down to, you know, we were leaving club nights and, you know, 50 people would turn up at my house wanting to party at my house, and they would just, you know, I didn't have the strength to say no, because I was without family. I'd lost my main person by then, and I was so desperately lonely because of that I took the false popularity of my you know, I was generous and people wanted to come and take part of that generosity, and so I gave it, you know, I took the company from that as you know, company, because people thought, you know, that they wanted to spend time with me. But actually people were just using my house. They were stubbing their cigarettes out in my plant pots. They were just ruining everything that I owned. People pinched everything, my makeup, my clothes, my jewelry. I mean, you know, every weekend I would lose a mobile phone. You know, people would just come and empty my house, and every weekend I'd be like, oh, well, oh gosh, you know, poor me and everything. But I didn't have the strength to say no. And I mean, that goes for men as well. You know, I would let men come and sleep with me because, you know, because I didn't want to be on my own. Yeah. And, you know, it was, I don't think I wanted anything from them, although, you know, you know, a lot of those men would turn up with, you know, drinking drugs and add to the party that we were having, and were popular and funny and all the rest of it. But I look back now and I think those people weren't the people that I wanted to spend my time with, or were my emotional or sort of artistic equals in my life. You know, they were people that were, I mean, you know, we knew a lot of very, you know, to put it bluntly, a lot of very bad and dangerous people. And I put myself at risk with people coming into my home and using me and my generosity. And, you know, police used to turn up and shine lights into the house, and people would scarper and be flushing things down the loo and all sorts, you know, and it would, at the time, I just didn't realize how much danger I was putting myself in, because the alternative to that was actually being on my own, and I couldn't stand it at that moment. Couldn't be on my own.
As far as emotional resilience goes, what has that behavior and that experience taught you? Like, what's your friendship circles like now? What do you get? Because that was all about what you can get from them,
Yeah,
what they can take from you.
yeah.
What do you get from your friends that you have now?
So this is the amazing thing that I will always be very grateful for, and that is that friends that I have had all my life almost had to let go of me during that time, because they ran out of being able to plead me to change things, and it hurt them too much to see what I was doing to myself. So a lot of people in my life went away for a while, for maybe, you know, 5 to 10 years, because they couldn't deal with what was going on, and I hadn't heeded their warnings about stuff. And I am very, very grateful, and not just friends, but clients and sort of extended family members as well. And I am very grateful that in the passage of time, people took me back under their wing when I was ready to admit, you know, and I apologized to a lot of people, and people saw that I was able to pull myself back from the brink and turn things around. And, you know, I think for any of us to be honest with other people is that we've got to be honest with ourselves first and foremost. And actually what you spend so much time running away from, the truth of your past, of what you're doing to yourself, you know, is so often a, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, is such a good comment for this, because it's so often people will not listen until they're ready, and you've almost got to just cut them free and let them find out for themselves. And I mean, that is very difficult for people that love you, because they are watching you in free fall, and some people don't get out of it, and there's no, you know, there's no shortage of people that crash and burn, and their families are left with a legacy that they couldn't do anything else to help. And, you know, there's some people that have the opportunity or the privileges or, you know, whatever in their lives to be able to pull things back from the brink, and there's some that very, very unfortunately don't. And I think sometimes it is down to emotional strength, but I think it's also financial, family. Some people can never put the challenges of their childhood or their past to bed. I mean, my dad killed himself at 44. He never made peace with what happened to him in his life. So, you know, when I turned 44, it was a big deal for me, because for many years, my dad killed himself when I was 20. And when I was really self-harming during my 20s, I used to think, you know, is history repeating itself? Am I going to be my dad at 44? You know, I'll be either damaged or dead. And, you know, for me, it was a personal victory to make it to 44, to have become a parent, and pulled my career back from the brink, and actually have found a degree of peace in my life. But a lot of people never, ever get to face up to, like, the pain of the past is too much.
I think to be fair though, Claire, the lifestyles that we used to live, I think if nothing changed, I think you wouldn't have made it to 44.
No, exactly. I think that, you know, and you know, that is because I started my life in a position of, in many people's eyes, great privilege, because, you know, I grew up abroad, I went to boarding schools. You know, I'm not the normal, I'm not the average story of having grown up in extreme poverty, for instance, which is in many instances the precursor to a lot of troubles that happen in people's lives. But alcoholism and drug abuse and neglect and child abuse goes on across the board. It doesn't matter how rich your family is. And the scars from that can, you know, I mean, I have to say that, you know, sometimes for people from very affluent backgrounds, the type of loneliness that you experience is much more, it can be more lonely, you know, than friends of mine that have been very poor as, you know, very poor and experienced. You know, I've got a great friend of mine who was from sort of a traveller background, and his family were incredibly poor, and there was loads of children. And he's always said, I had such a happy childhood. They were poor, but he was surrounded with family, and they were all at each other's aunties and uncles, and there was cousins everywhere. You always had somewhere to play with. And I view his experience, you know, that he was the privileged person, because I was an only child of two only children, both who were pretty screwed up mentally. And there was alcoholism and domestic abuse prevalent. And then I, unfortunately, was a victim of child sexual abuse between the ages of 8 and 9 before I started boarding school. And, you know, that I think it's a common misconception that if you came from a rich background, that you should never complain about anything. You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth and your problems weren't as bad as someone that was poor. But I think the damage that is caused is, you know, that's why I said to you about things like, you know, these sort of formulaic, you know, trying to look at mental health problems in a formulaic way. You've got to treat every single person as an individual, because their unique circumstances of their life, it makes a different result every single time.
It really annoys me when we have those conversations about, you know, I usually use the example of somebody telling you about how bad their day's been, and then the response is, "Wow, you think you've had a bad day?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about my day." And it's just because your upbringing was different to other people's doesn't mean that those problems aren't the worst that they could have been for you at that time.
Totally.
You know, and obviously what you went through as a child, that's horrendous, whatever your background is. But everything else, so the being an only child, that can be horrendous on its own. Regardless
totally.
of how big your house, you know, how could you ever be bored if you live in a big house with a massive
exactly.
if you've never, and it's not the same. And I think it's easy for people who haven't had those things to put this amazing imagination into what that life would be like. But the reality.
But I mean, I was we moved to the Philippines when I was 7 years old, and my mum was an alcoholic. She'd left when I was about 3, and gone back to a previous partner. And then just my dad and I moved out to the Philippines because my dad thought that would be a great upbringing for me. And, you know, when you're an expatriate abroad, you are showered with, you know, very luxurious lifestyle, because my dad was he was financial director of Beecham's Pharmaceuticals in Southeast Asia. So he was in charge of making all the penicillin. All the penicillin factories in the world are in Southeast Asia at that point. And he was in charge of making penicillin for people to take all over the world. And so he used to travel a lot. And it was the driver who had been supplied by his company that sexually abused me when my dad wasn't So actually my privilege was the thing that made me vulnerable to being taken advantage of, because I didn't have a family and I lived in a massive mansion where I was sort of rattling around the corridors on my own when my dad was away, and nobody was there to look out for me. So like I was neglected. People say, how can you be neglected if you live in a mansion? But actually, if you're there on your own and there's someone predatorial there, then you're ripe for the picking, aren't you? So, you know, and actually what I went through at that time, because I was told to shut up, you know, I suffered so badly with anxiety, and I didn't understand what had happened to me until I had my own boyfriend at 17 years old. That was.
But you never told anybody about it or anything? Nothing?
No, I'd been told not to. Because he'd always said that if I told my dad, that my dad would be really angry and upset with me. And I would never want my dad to be angry and upset with me. So I didn't say anything, although I was doing things at that time that must have been a giveaway at what was going on. But my dad was such a lovely guy. He was such an honest and sort of, he would always give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't think it would have ever crossed his mind that especially someone working for him would do that to me. And then when my behavioral problems got really bad, he just didn't understand what was going on. And I didn't really understand it either. I was suffering hugely from anxiety. And I used to lie when I was leaving school and get on the wrong school bus and go back to a friend of mine's house. And when my dad was abroad, my friend's mother would phone him in Japan and Hong Kong and say, John, Claire's here at our house again. Like, why is she here? And my dad would be so embarrassed and like, I'm so sorry, I'll send the driver to come and pick her up, because I was just trying to not go home on my own. And, you know, I think my dad just didn't put two and two together and realize what was going on. And, you know, it wasn't until I was in my teens, until I had my first boyfriend, that I realized what had happened. Because a lot of people that were sexually abused as children don't realize what was happening to them was sex until you meet somebody with whom you have consensual sex. And then you think, this isn't the first time. And then you're like, and that's, you know, that I went through a whole phase of anxiety when I was sort of 17, 18, when I would, like, my mind was blown, because I was like, oh my God, that's what it was. And unfortunately, because I told my dad what had happened for the first time, not long after that, my dad took his life, because I think he just couldn't stand to realize and think back at what had happened, and that he'd allowed that to happen to me. So I've had to, I mean, my dad had a very, very difficult life anyway, but, you know, I think what I told him about what had happened was the straw that broke the camel's back, and he couldn't handle that he'd allowed someone to do that to me on his watch, as it were. And it just, his faith in humanity had been knocked after an incredibly bad divorce from my stepmother before that. But, you know, I think that bit of news crushed him so badly that I have got to live with the fact that if I hadn't told my dad that piece of information, he might still be here, you know. And that's been. And
you can't beat yourself up about that, in the sense that you don't know if that was.
I know.
Like
I know. But I mean, that in my complete going off the rails during my 20s was a reaction to me thinking, you know, I essentially tipped my dad over the edge, and, you know, and I've got to live with that for the rest of my life. And I mean,
thinking about it now, what do you think would have happened if you would have told him when you was 9?
That man would have been, my dad would have killed that man.
Yeah.
He would have killed him. That's it. My dad would have killed him.
So, I mean, even if you would have done that and he would have killed him, he would have been in a.
I know, exactly.
Prison for the rest.
But I mean, you know, that man, I don't know if that man went on and did that to other people. And I do feel regretful that I didn't at least tip off the company when I was a teenager, and I realized I felt like I should have said something to stop him being able to work at what he was working as. But I mean, the truth is that most families that he would have worked for would have had a mother and a father and siblings, and he never would have been left alone with children for an extended amount of time in order to do that. I was just left in a unique sort of weird situation where there was no mother in the house and no siblings, and there was no one to know what was going on. But I mean, when I just crashed and burned during my 20s, it was just, I just couldn't think about any of it. I couldn't deal with it. And I think for a lot of people that go through immense hardship, I think we all have, it's the same as dealing with a bereavement when there's a sudden bereavement from a car crash versus a bereavement from a long illness where you've been able to say goodbye.
Yeah.
It's like, you have, the human body has an amazing way of storing up your ability to cope with something until you're ready to deal with it. And we all deal with that in a different way. Some people crash and burn, some people go crazy and become self-destructive. Some people, I know another guy who had a very, very difficult family life. His dad was killed in a car crash when he was very young, and then his mum was actually murdered. And he's never crashed and burned. He's always been really hardworking and incredibly strong. And I don't know if that's because he will have a moment in his life where he flips, and it all comes out. Yeah. Or whether he's got behavioral problems that means that he can't form healthy relationships with people and stuff like that. But I think emotional resilience, our emotions manifest themselves in so many different ways, and it is really unique in every single instance of how people can deal with things, or how people choose to hide things from themselves. A friend of mine was telling me the other day that she's just come through alcoholism. She was talking to her mum about some of the family history, and her mum at sort of 80 years old has never dealt with the trauma that their family went through in her childhood. And I think partly as a generational thing, people did carry around trauma that they experienced as children to the deathbed without ever talking about it, and we're luckier in our generation that we can sit here like this and talk openly about this stuff, because a generation or two ago, it was completely frowned upon to actually compare notes between people and families and stuff. Like you never told the family laundry in public, did you? People just took it to their deathbed and that was it. And I think society is getting healthier because we are now sharing it, and there is a recognition for things like the Men's Shed or peer support and Alcoholics Anonymous and all of those things, to stand up and say, I've fallen down and I want to change things around.
Yeah.
So
what do you do today? So how do you cope with things today? So you mentioned obviously your friend that you feel like he didn't process things. So
for me, and for so many people I know, sobriety has been one of the light bulb moments. So chaos kept happening, as I didn't have an off switch. It was an all or nothing situation. So I could never just have a glass of wine and go home. It was like out and out carnage until I didn't know what I was doing. I would get, I would make stupid decisions. I would spend time with people that, I shouldn't have been with, you know, and that kept my self-confidence and my self-worth at rock bottom, because I was always messing up. You know, I was always just messing up, covered in bruises, wake up, like, might have like half the stuff out of my handbag missing, you know, just didn't know what on earth I'd been up to. People would ring me the next day or text me the next day and say, did you get home all right? You know, I mean, and I would just go through the next week feeling ashamed of myself, you know, that I'd really let myself down, essentially. And that cycle of, you know, drugs and drink and stuff like that was incredibly self-destructive. And actually, until sobriety came along, and I mean, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, I'm not going to drink during the week. You know, I did that for years, said I'm not going to drink, or even I'm only going to go out once this week, this month, but then wreck yourself doing it, you know, and then feel depressed for a week. Because really, especially when you've been abusing substances and stuff, I think the chemical imbalance in your head, you know, your depletion of things like serotonin and what's the Brazil nuts give you? Is it serotonin? Brazil nuts give you an amazing hit of happiness. Happiness. Pardon?
Is that a real thing? Brazil?
Yes, Brazil nuts. They give you. Why can't I remember the name of it? Brazil nuts are very high in a chemical that you deplete in your head when you've been drinking and carrying on. And yeah, I think one of the things that I did get into during my 20s was yoga and meditation and nutrition. So I started to redress the balance slowly. I knew I was damaging myself and I wanted to change. And I started to drink green tea. I started to do yoga. I started to look after myself a bit better, you know, when I wasn't wrecking myself.
Yeah.
Because before that, it had just been constant. There was a yoga lesson that used to go on at a church hall just near where I lived, and I started doing that. And I found that the ever decreasing circles of drink and alcohol and going out slowly started to, you know, I once I twigged with yoga, because it takes a while for you to do it properly, for you to get the endorphins from it and realize that it's not just mumbo jumbo and it's actually bloody amazing. And from that, I read books, you know, I read a lot about books by Paulo Coelho about spirituality and stuff like that. And I actually went back to church and did an alpha course at church, which is like alpha courses are an introduction to Christianity, essentially. And I started to replace one crazy sort of cycle with the other, which is that I discovered that I was boosting my self-confidence and my sense of self-worth by changing things around a bit and starting to do positive things. And I had a psychologist for a while who he helped me in many ways turn my view of myself around in several different ways. He used to say to me, you know, that the friends that we keep in our lives can usually be classified into two different categories, and that you have the friends in your lives that are cats and the friends in your lives that are dogs. And he said both of them are fantastic. You know, you love both. And he said your cat friends are beautiful, they are elegant, they you know, they come and sit on your lap when they want, they demand feeding, you know, you love spending time with them when it suits them, you know. And he said that, but they just go off and ignore you, you know, when they want to. And he said to me, your dog friends will defend you. They are always wagging their tail. You know, they are always ready for a walk. They would stick by your side through thick and thin. You know, they will rescue you, you know, whatever. And he just said, you know, cats and dogs are amazing in equal measures, but your dog friends will always be the ones that, you know, really encourage you to do better, whereas your cat friends will sort of take what you've got to offer and then bugger off, basically. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because it helped me realize that I had been spending a lot of time and energy on people that would never really be encouraging of me bettering myself. Like they did well when I was needy. They did well when I let them take from me. And, you know, when I had a low self-esteem, those people did better out of me than when I had you know, self-control. When I had self-control, people weren't coming to my house and partying because I wasn't going out all the time, you know, and that disappointed them because they wanted to use my welcome for their own benefit. And that was one of the things that changed things around for me. And the other thing that psychotherapist said to me, because I'd never thought of myself as a precious child, I'd always thought of myself as a bit of a hassle or lonely, or you know, why didn't I have a mum? Why didn't I have a family around me that were protecting me? Why had these horrible things happen to me that made me so scared? And, you know, I think this happens to a lot of children, is that, you know, you have such low self-confidence that I never felt like I was worthy of protecting from what happened to me when I was a child. And then when I grew up, I just let people do whatever they wanted with me, because I didn't have enough self-worth to think that I was worth preserving. Like, I remember that, there was a couple of really, really nice boys, really nice men in my 20s that were interested in me as a girlfriend. And I just cast them off, because I was like, no, I'm too, you know, I'm just, they're too good for me. I can't handle the pressure of going out with someone that is so nice. And so, you know, I'd go out with drug dealers and, you know, people that treated me really badly, because that's what I thought I was deserved, because I didn't have a high enough self-worth of myself that I deserved to be with someone. And the psychologist said to me, he said, you know, you should always think of yourself as a princess in a castle. You know, all people are a prince or a princess in a castle. You know, you're all special and deserve the very best in your lives. And, you know, if a dragon comes, you've got the castle walls to protect you. And if, you know, and then Prince Charming or Princess Charming should come and, you know, and fight for your heart, because you are worth winning over. And it took me years. I mean, in fact, to be honest, the only thing that has ever given me a sense of self-worth is becoming a mum, and the fact that my son is so amazing. It makes me feel like I've actually managed to not only raise an amazing guy, and I don't know how much that is due to myself, or the fact that, like, fate means that he is this fantastic, but also, you know, I've managed to go sober, so that is a massive thing. That raised my sense of self-worth so much, because I stopped fucking up constantly. And I would say to a lot of people, because it's so easy to say, I'm not an alcoholic, or I'm not a drug addict, you know, I just have a nice time with my friends. But actually, if those decisions lead to problematic things happening in your life, and the end, you know, the ends of good relationships and stuff like that. I think, you know, I think that sobriety, I think, especially when you've been sober for an amount of time, a friend of mine once said, you know, whenever he has to make big decisions in his life, he stops drinking and taking drugs for 3 months, because that's how long it takes for your blood in your system to fully renew. So whatever toxins you have in your system, it takes a 3-month cycle for all of your blood to renew into non-toxic affected blood. And he always makes decisions about his relationships and stuff like that after a long period of sobriety, because I think the chemical imbalances in your body that you do to yourself when you're habitually carrying on and not eating properly, not sleeping properly, and not giving yourself a break from you know, not only the physical harm of abusing drugs and drink, but the fact that to come back to neutral in your head takes a while. It's not like, oh, well, I haven't had a drink for 2 days. You know, it takes a long time to wake up in the morning and look out the window and think, I am in the world today. Because, I mean, you can stop drinking for a week after being an alcoholic, and you know, at that point, you're probably at your most vulnerable, probably at your most sort of unbalanced in how you feel, and physically and mentally. You know, I would say that a turning point for a lot of people is going sober for a while. Yeah. And it's so difficult. It's so difficult.
It is. I was lucky in the sense that I went to prison, and it wasn't as available. The drugs I was taking wasn't as available. I was going to say, if I didn't go to prison, I'd have struggled to stop taking drugs. But if I'm honest, if I didn't go to prison, I wouldn't have known I was an addict with a problem and to stop taking drugs. But I genuinely don't think, if I would have had to go through the process out of prison, I'd have struggled because of the temptations and everything.
I think a lot of people need a breaking point, or a light bulb moment, or a shock of some kind, that is the, like, you know, when someone's hysterical and you give them a slap on the face to just bring them back to nothing. It's like you've got to have, you know, I mean, for you and I, we probably had a series of wake-up calls that we ignored. You know, and you know, there's a lot of people that have been in the positions that you and I have, you know, where we did do something about those wake-up calls, the eventual ones that would never have done. They still be in the same cycle now. There's, you know, it's a unique thing to every individual whether you can turn the corner or not. And there's nothing wrong. I mean, what I say to a lot of friends of mine that, you know, that have been addicts, whether it's drugs or drink, is don't say you're going to give up. You know, don't put a massive pressure on yourself and make a Facebook statement saying, I'm giving up drinking, because you're setting yourself up for a fall. You know, you're announcing this huge thing, and then the next time someone sees you falling down the stairs in town, you know, you think, oh, fucking hell, I feel so miserable about myself. And actually, I just think when you get to the point in your life where you realize that for your own good, that you want to start making a change. And for many people, that might be finding God, it might be finding yoga, it might be, you know, becoming a vegan, or going running, or going to prison, or getting arrested, or any of those things, you know, could be the turning point. I think that most people that make a genuine change in their lives do it in a very private way. Most people just disappear off. It's not announced on Facebook. You know, it's a intensely personal thing. And I think one of the biggest things, if I can just say, for me, that I would say as a piece of advice, and this comes across, you know, some people can't handle this, is, for me, finding a point where I could forgive the people in my past was the moment that set me free. And so many people that have experienced abuse or hardship or domestic abuse, sexual abuse or domestic abuse, or, whose parental, parents were terrible or whatever, they just, I know a lot of people that have said to me, I just cannot ever forgive what they did to my mum, to my whatever. I can never forgive them. And it's because in our minds, we think that if you forgive somebody, that you're letting them off for what they did to you.
Yeah. And
that is not the case. When you forgive somebody, you're not negating what they did in your life to damage you. What you're doing is saying, I am stopping you having any hold over how I'm going to walk forward from this point forward. Because I'd spent my 20s blaming everything on the people in my life, my stepmother, the guy that sexually abused me when I was a child, the other people in my life, my family, the crazy, sort of drama queens and stuff like that. And, and my mum for walking out when, she was an alcoholic. And I used to just carry that round as a sort of a blame sack on my back that I would use. Oh, well, I can just get hammered and fuck up because I had a hard time in my youth, and that was my cycle was, I'll go out and get wrecked, appall myself, feel really shit about it, and then blame my past for it, and then just never ever resolve anything. And actually, I read some books by Paulo Coelho, and I'd recommend that author to anybody that wants to read books about spiritual sort of like overcoming difficult times. And I realized, I think it was one of those books that had sort of said that the key to your freedom in your head and from the past is forgiveness. You've got to forgive the people that messed you up, because what you're doing is you're cutting the cord with them that have dragged you, kept you held back in the past. They've anchored you in that horrible sea. And actually, the only way you're ever going to reach dry land is if you cut that cord and, say, you're not going to affect me anymore. Yeah. I'm not going to use you as an excuse because I'm going to do better. I don't need an excuse because I'm going to stop damaging myself all the time. And I am going to swim to dry land now, and that's what forgiveness is. It isn't saying that what those people did wasn't hideous. Yeah. You can, and you can always, be angry with them. But forgiveness, it stops you being angry with the world. And, that for me was a huge, huge turning point. And I was in a very, very weird situation on the forgiveness day, and I will never, ever forget it. I was actually on a beach in Malaysia that day.
All right.
But which I'm, I understand that I am extremely lucky and privileged to have been able to do. Basically, when I was 31, a very elderly relative of mine from South Africa had passed away, and left a little bit of money to all of the extended sort of like young people in the family. I spent the couple of grand I had on a round the world ticket. From the advice of somebody else, said the best thing you could do is get yourself out. Take yourself somewhere else, even if if you're not able to go traveling, which none of us are at the moment, but even if you go on a voluntary thing, or because a lot of people went to do African volunteering with orphans and stuff like that, is to leave the, as long as I was living in Leeds at that time, I still became dragged back into all of the bad practices that I'd been doing sometimes. And in fact, for you, going to prison, probably was the thing that saved you from being stuck in that whole cycle that just kept you anchored in it forever. Yeah. And that actually, whether it's prison, whether it's going to, you know, volunteer with something, or whether it's just going and, you know, borrowing someone's caravan at Bridlington and sitting there for a week on your own. And I think solitude is an important thing during that time, is when you really think back to what's happened in your life. And the importance of it is never minimized, but you decide that you are not going to let it hold you back any longer. And for me, I cried, I shouted at the people. I was on my own in the middle of a really weird situation on an island in the middle of nowhere. I'd lost my wallet getting hammered in Singapore. I didn't have any money, and a guy that I'd met in Singapore who worked at a weird island in Malaysia had said, "Why don't you come and work for me for a month?" And so I found myself in this really weird, isolated situation. And during that time, I had enough time on my own to really, really think about everything that had happened in my life. And I, one afternoon, just literally screamed at the sun and went mad. Sort of like that scene in, do you remember that scene with the badger when in It's All Gone Pete Tong, where he locks himself in that room with that badger and goes just insane? You know, like you've got to, the whole thing about walking away from your demons is you've got to bloody face them. Yeah. And they send you mad, and you reach the pits of stripping your life and yourself bare, really. You can't move on, you can't pretend to move on unless you peel the scab off and wallow in what, you know, in really investigating what's happened in your life, and then deciding to say, you're not going to rule me anymore, and walking forward with a different, you know, with a different renewed energy. And actually there's a really famous quote, and it says, let me just find it. It's we all have two lives. Two lives. I will find it for you. I've got it saved on my phone a million times. Or we all live two lives. It's basically along the lines of, you learn from your first life. Like your first life is the chaos, and then your second life is the freedom, sort of, you know. And I think it's different for people that have experienced traumatic childhoods, because you feel like you haven't had a normal life to begin with. But actually now,
so it says we have two lives: the life we learn with and the life we live after that.
Yes,
suffering is what brings us towards happiness.
That's it. That's exactly it. That's the right one. Yes, and you know, and suffering that brings us towards happiness is so true, because, you know, like a lot of us have experienced massive hardship in lots of different ways. And I went through my teenage years being so bitter because everybody around me had family lives, they were protected, they had amazing 18th birthdays with their lovely families and Christmases and stuff like that. And I didn't have any of that. And I was so bitter and broken with the lack of it, that I was so resentful and so chaotic because of it. And, you know, I think for a lot of people that have very privileged lives, or not, I don't mean privileged monetarily, but a lot of people I know that have always had very steady lives, fantastic family, you know, great support, really good at school, you know, went into jobs that they loved, met wonderful men and married. You know, I've got a lot of, now that I'm 46, I've got a lot of friends in my life that are experiencing hardship for the first times in their life. So they are divorcing, or they are losing a parent possibly for the first time in their lives. And it's blowing them out of the water. And they are now, you know, one of the biggest privileges for me is that I am now in a position to put my arm around people and offer them support, because I'm capable of doing that, having overcome my own demons, to be able to offer advice and support to people that are having probably the first really tumultuous moment of their own lives. And I find that for a lot of people, it's much more difficult to experience hardship for the first time as a sort of a grown-up, you know, because it's so shocking to them how awful grief and bereavement and cruelty and stuff like that is. Whereas for many of us, we were so used to it that that's what we thought the, you know, the common part of our lives was. It was just like, well, you know, you grow up thinking, well, I don't have faith that anything is going to be any good because I'm so used to it being shit. So it takes, you know, and now I find my enjoyment of little tiny things like nature and friendships and, you know, serendipity when you see a friend you haven't seen for ages in the street or whatever, you know, those things in my life make my day. Oh my God, I find joy in tiny things that so many of my friends are so busy and, you know, materialistic and stuff. I think until you have been cut down, like that says, you know, you don't understand what happiness is until you've experienced real hardship. And I think it's easy for a lot of people to be complacent in their non-eventful lives. But, you know, times of trauma and hardship are going to happen to everybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel that having overcome so much of it, I feel lucky, if the word is, that I can live from now on. I know how cruel the world can be, and I'm sort of ready to take it on.
I've
and
always said I'm in a better position to live the rest of my life because of everything I've been through.
Yeah.
So when people always ask, you know, if you could go back and change things, it's difficult because the rest of my life is going to be so much better now because of all the bad things that have happened.
It's so true. I mean, you know, would I would do anything for my dad to be here, you know, anything. But, you know, you've come this far. I just don't know whether I would want to be a normal person now, because I feel like the role I feel that I have now is to try and help other people.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't know what I know now.
Yeah, I think it's important for people who are watching this who have either been through something or might be going through something to understand that it's better in their life, although it might not feel like it at this moment in time.
Yeah.
But like you've said, like I've said, it's sort of a test run, and it's the more, I mean, sometimes it's too much. Like I meet some people who tell me some horrendous things, and I've just become numb to some of the horrible things that happen in life because we have conversations about them on quite a regular basis. But then that gives me the ability, like yourself, to be there and support them without letting emotion come in.
Yeah.
If you hear something horrendous for the first time, you share that moment with them. And that's not what they always need at that time. So
yeah, they need somebody that's pragmatic and calm. You know, I'm sorry, my cat is trying to.
Oh no, it's okay.
I
think your cat's annoyed because it heard you talking about dog people being better than cats.
I know, exactly. She's gutted.
No,
I accidentally locked her into the. I've got a shed at the bottom of the garden that I keep art materials in, and I accidentally locked her in for 24 hours and then was worrying about what had happened to her, and she'd been locked in there. She still hasn't forgiven me really now. But no, I think it's so true. And you know, I often think, you know, I mean, one of the things that I often think with, you know, for instance, what's happening in cities with knife crime is that the people that are best, you know, best equipped to help young people are the people that have made it out of that life and that can now talk from personal experience, because nobody wants to be lectured or spoken at about the hardships in their lives by people that haven't experienced some kind of overcoming stuff, because it's only by personal experience really that you don't have to have had the same personal experience. I think empathy,
something, I
yeah,
completely agree, and that's the whole basis of why I started the company. I've been there, I've done that, and this is what it was like for me. That's literally what we do, and it's exactly why I wanted you to come and talk, because I think who better to talk about these topics than someone with, I'm going to call it an amazing story. I don't mean amazing in a sort of derogatory way, that you've been through these things and these are real things that have happened to you. But it's amazing I know your personality today, and I didn't know some of those things about your past. And I think it's an amazing how you've got to where you are now, knowing all the things that you've sort of had to.
And equally with yourself, I think that any of us that that end up sharing their story is is doing so because whatever hardships we have overcome, they I think you were saying earlier that you put a post on Facebook or something, and that you'd have a flurry of people from across your friendship group that had actually come out and said, oh yeah, me too, me too, me too. And I think that the thing about mental health, which essentially all of these things boil down to substance abuse and doing harmful behaviors, boils down to bad decisions. And I think that I've lost my train of thought now. What was I about to say?
You said something about my post on Facebook and everyone was saying me too.
Yes, that the thing is, and we're lucky at this time in life, because I was talking earlier, wasn't I, about an 80-year-old lady that had never ever spoken about her family problems, because as a generational thing, you would never air your dirty laundry in public. And I think we're living through a time now where we've got the future King of England sitting on telly doing mental health public speaking, and we've got the Men's Shed, we've got all manner of amazing organizations that are encouraging people to share stories and learn from each other. And I think that sharing stories is probably the only way to draw other people out of sometimes the lonely box that they've put themselves in, and realizing that everybody else goes through absolute terrible times in their lives, and they might not be the same kind of terrible times, but that overcoming hardship unifies people. Exactly how, if you were coming out of the World War in a couple of generations ago, that the whole nation was unified in overcoming that. It's not quite the same nowadays, because everybody experiences their hardships in different ways, but to know that it's a great, a lot of people are very proud and find it very difficult to ask for help or say that the ghosts of their past overwhelm them, or it's a very good thing to let people know that they can come and speak about what they can, how to overcome some of the things that when you lie in bed awake at night, the things that live in your head basically, and how to possibly move forward past some of the things. Because I mean, I'm always amazed when they, every now and again they'll have a series of programs where they interview Holocaust survivors on the television and stuff like that. And I look at those people and I think, and they're like in their 90s now, and I think you overcame that, and you listen to their stories. Like, humans are so amazing because they can overcome war, they can overcome you know, amazingly trying times, and come out of it with grace and wisdom and kindness. And I think, I think essentially we're all capable of that. It's just helping people to find the right way for them to deal with their own things.
I'm hoping people get that from this. One of the things I hope they get as well is hope. We spoke a lot about how much better things are for us now. So I hope that people who are watching it will get from where they are to where they could potentially be. And try and inspire other people. Claire?
And there are some fantastic organisations that that deal with people that are addicted and stuff like that, that encourage people to walk away and find sort of to have a break and find clarity. And I think any of those things make you feel like you're stuck in a spider's web that you can't break free of. And I would say, regardless of money or whatever, I mean, I think if you felt overwhelmed, that you were in a negative situation and you had, for instance, an old aunt that lived in Scotland, I would just recommend go and stay with someone for a fortnight. Try and make a little bit of time, a break away from the cycle that's doing you damage, and just walk away and try and get some clarity. Try and just go for a walk every day in the woods, because being in nature and stuff like that, I always say to people, in the summertime, go and lie in the park, go lie in a meadow and look at the sky. It brings clarity into your head that it's so easy. And I used to do it for years, curl up on my sofa, daytime television, useless, disappointed with myself for not doing anything with myself, tempted to drink or take drugs because I was so bored. Get up and put your coat on and walk in the rain. And there's something so restorative about walking in nature and breathing in the air, and it brings a complete reset button to your day of actually, I'm going to go home and I'm going to change. I'm going to send some CVs off. I'm going to contact an old relatives and see if they can help me. And, it can be tiny things like baby steps of reading a good book like Paulo Coelho book or something like that just starts the ball rolling, because you're on one cycle that's ever decreasing, and there's the equal cycle that is ever increasing your power and your positivity. And someone once said to me, if you have negative thoughts, you maximize your negativity. And if you have positive thoughts, you maximize your positivity. And one of the greatest things, a friend of mine, this is a good bit of advice actually, because I used to keep a diary for years, and my diaries, sporadic diaries, I just want to burn them now because they're so horrible. But generally my diaries were just utter misery, complaining, blaming, misery, being held in a horrible position. And my friend said to me, just keep a happiness diary. Just keep a diary by your bed, and every evening write in it the good things that have happened today. And you will find yourself, instead of writing, awful stuff, you will find yourself wanting to create things to put in your happiness diary. So you will make yourself an amazing cup of tea and have biscuits and put that in your diary, instead of pouring yourself a whiskey. Or you will walk in nature and have some lovely conversation with somebody on the bus or something like that, and that will go in your happiness diary. And that roll on of that positivity, I may as well go to yoga because I feel like I want to do something positive, and then you feel better, and then you speak to someone nice on the phone, and you start to create the good luck in your life, because you are.
I spoke to someone who does yoga, and she was talking about positive affirmations.
Yes.
I was skeptical, and I was just like, just because you say that something is going to happen doesn't mean it. He was like, no, I'm not saying if you just tell yourself every day you're going to win the lottery that you're going to win the lottery. but you can say to yourself, money's going to come my way, money's going to, and then things start to fall into place, or you focus then on how am I going to make this possible.
Yeah.
So it was maybe 2 weeks ish before my driving test.
Yeah.
So I said, do you know what, I'm going to try it. So every morning, instead of just saying I'm going to pass my driving test, I said I'm going to pass my driving test with 0 minors. You know, I'm the addict, I'm always going to set the bar too high. So every morning I said to myself, I'm going to pass my driving test, I'm going to get 0 minors. And then I had my test and I passed my driving test.
Brilliant.
And passed it with 0 minors.
Brilliant.
And I just said it to myself every morning. I mean, the skeptic in me said, all right, so what if you wouldn't have said
you
that?
were really good at driving?
0 minors, or what would have happened? But yeah, I do believe that, because it's the way you carry yourself. If you're a negative thinking person,
yeah,
you're going to give off this, you're going to walk in a negative way, you're going to approach every situation in a negative way. And I think it does have a knock-on effect.
And for so many years, the people in my life that loved me, that had sort of, you know, they'd been saying, you know, well, you could do this and you could do that. And I would say, oh no, I can't do that. I can't do that. I was such a defeatist for so long that I was keeping myself wallowing in that, you know, when, you know, I know that I should have left Leeds and gone and done a painting course in Florence. You know, I could have, you know, I would be in a completely different part of my life by now if I'd made a different decision, instead of allowing myself to become entrenched in the negativity. I mean, fortunately, you know, I've managed to you know, find positivity in the end. But you know, it is the sliding doors element, like the movie Sliding Doors, where you go that way or that way. And it's helping people to make positive, you know, positive decisions in their lives sooner rather than later. You know, and it's I mean, I read an amazing, well, most people have read The Secret, the people, you know, people that have wanted to turn things. Yeah, I mean, I've never really agreed with you know, being, you know, trying to manifest money. I think what I do when I'm manifesting, when I essentially praying almost, is I imagine myself painting on a canvas and feeling happy and relaxed. That's what my positive manifestation has been for years. And you know, every time I am standing painting at a canvas, I am grateful. You know, I think positive manifestation is fantastic. You know, it shouldn't be spent on Ferraris. It should be spent on sitting at a Sunday lunch table with your family, or you know, wonderful little things that are going to enrich your life in a much more positive way than diamond rings and stuff like that, even though that might be quite nice when it happens. I wouldn't know, but yeah, you know, I think there's, you know, reading was definitely one of the things. I read a book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, and that was a brilliant book. You should read it. I'll send you a link to the author after. It was a brilliant book about walking away from sort of material greed, and you know, and the things that really, you know, like I said earlier, one of the biggest things for me has been sobriety, that has helped me feel a sense of self-worth. And you know, I have a glass of wine at Christmas and stuff like that now. I've managed to find a degree of, you know, like I can have a little treat, but you know, I just, you know, and a lot of alcoholics and sort of addicts cannot ever go back. You know, I wouldn't, everyone's unique, they've got to find their own way through it. But you know, I think being sober most of the time has definitely been the best psychological change for me. And I would recommend that to people, that even if it's only temporary, if you're trying to make a change or a big decision, a time without drink and drugs is absolutely vital to really think about facing up to the past and what you want out of the future.
Brilliant. Claire, I really appreciate you coming on and talking.
My absolute pleasure.
It's been amazing to find out more about you.
Yeah, you.
And yeah, it has. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you.
Anytime. Okay.